The meeting room was cold. Jake Morrison stood near the back wall and watched as the representatives from different alien species took their seats. The Coalition Station Epsilon 9 was massive, floating in space like a small city made of metal and glass. Ships from 100 different worlds docked here every day. Today, the main assembly hall was full. Jake was the commander of a human diplomatic vessel called the Horizon's Edge. He had been in space for 15 years, but he still felt uncomfortable in rooms like this. The aliens were so different from each other. Some had scales, others had fur, and a few looked like walking crystals. But they all had one thing in common. They feared the three elder races who controlled the coalition. Ambassador Lisa Hamilton walked to the center platform. She was a tall woman with gray hair tied back in a tight knot. Her face was serious as she activated the holographic display. Images appeared in the air above her head. They showed human merchant ships, or what was left of them, twisted metal, burned hulls, empty corridors where people used to work and live. Lisa's voice was steady, but Jake could hear the anger beneath it. She explained that 17 human ships had been destroyed in the past 6 months. More than 300 people were dead. Families were gone. Children would never see their parents again. The attacks happened in neutral space, areas where everyone was supposed to be safe. The evidence was clear. The attackers were Krathon raiders. The Krathon were one of the three elder races. They looked like huge reptiles that walked on 2 legs. Their scales were dark green and their eyes were yellow. They had been part of the coalition for over 1,000 years. They commanded respect through fear. Their military was the largest in known space. War Marshal Draxus sat in the Krathon section of the assembly hall. He was bigger than the other Krathon, with scars running across his face and arms. When Lisa finished her presentation, he stood up slowly. His movement was deliberate, meant to show power. The room fell silent. Draxus spoke in a deep voice that echoed through the hall. He said the human claims were lies. He said that even if some ships were destroyed, it was not the Coalition's concern. Then his tone changed. He said that humans occupied space that belonged to the Krathon Empire. Those star systems were in territories that the Krathon had claimed long before humans even learned to build spaceships. Jake felt his hands tighten into fists. The colonies Draxus talked about had been established over a century ago. Human families lived there. Children were born there. These were homes, not territories to be claimed and discarded. Draxus continued. He said that humanity had 30 days to evacuate all colonies beyond the Sol system. That meant abandoning 6 worlds where millions of humans lived. If humanity refused, the Krathon Empire would consider it an act of war. The Marshal sat down with a satisfied expression on his face. He believed the matter was settled. Lisa looked around the assembly hall. She called for the Coalition Council to intervene. This was why the Coalition existed, she said. To prevent stronger species from destroying weaker ones, to maintain peace and justice in the galaxy. Her voice was passionate, but Jake could see the desperation in her eyes. The Vex Collective representative spoke next. The Vex were strange beings that looked like floating geometric shapes surrounded by energy fields. Their voice came from a translator device and sounded emotionless. The Vex said they would abstain from any vote on this matter. It was not their concern. Then the Orlan sovereignty representative stood. The Orlan looked almost human except for their pale blue skin and completely black eyes. They were known as diplomats and traders. Their representative suggested that perhaps humanity had expanded too quickly. Maybe it would be wise to consolidate their holdings. Better to lose some colonies than risk a war nobody wanted. Jake watched as the other species in the room stayed silent. The smaller races, the ones who had even less power than humanity, looked down at their seats. They would not speak against the Krathon. They could not afford to make such an enemy. Fear ruled this place more than justice ever would. The council chair called for a vote on intervention. One by one, the representatives voted or abstained. When it was finished, the result was clear. The coalition would not act. Humanity was on its own. Lisa stood alone on the platform for a moment. Jake could see her shoulders sag slightly. Then she straightened up and walked back to the human section with her head high. She sat down next to Jake and whispered something he would never forget. She said that they tried to do this the right way. Now they would do it the human way. The assembly ended and the various species began to leave. Jake stayed in his seat and watched Draxus across the room. The Krathon Marshal was surrounded by his warriors. They were laughing about something. Draxus looked toward the human section and made a gesture that Jake recognized as dismissive. The marshal thought humans were weak. Jake's personal communication device vibrated. He looked down and saw a message from Captain Elena Rodriguez. Elena commanded one of the Earth Defense Force vessels stationed near Mars. Her message was brief. It said that preparations were already underway. There was an attachment labeled Operation Ghost Protocol. Jake opened the file. His eyes moved quickly across the information on his screen. What he read made his heart beat faster. The file contained specifications for ships he had never seen before. Weapon systems that seemed impossible, strategic deployments that had been planned for decades. This was not a defensive plan. This was a blueprint for total war. He looked up again at Draxus and his warriors. They were still laughing. They had no idea what was coming. The Krathon thought they were about to crush a weak species. They believed their threats would make humans run away in fear. They were wrong. Jake remembered his history lessons from school. He remembered learning about Earth's past. Humans had fought wars for thousands of years. They had perfected the art of violence and then chosen to put it aside when they joined the galactic community. They wanted peace. They wanted to be part of something bigger than themselves. But wanting peace did not mean they forgot how to fight. Lisa stood up and motioned for Jake to follow her. They walked through the corridors of the station toward their ship. Other species moved out of their way. Some looked at them with pity. Others with curiosity. A few with contempt. Nobody looked at them with respect. That would change soon. When they reached the horizon's edge, Lisa went straight to her quarters. Jake went to the bridge and ordered his crew to prepare for departure. His pilot, a young man named Sam Chen, asked where they were going. Jake told him to set course for Earth. Sam looked surprised. Earth was weeks away at normal speed. Jake said to use the fast lanes and push the engines. They needed to get home quickly. As the ship undocked from the station, Jake stood at the main viewport and looked back at Epsilon 9. The station was beautiful in its own way. Thousands of windows glowed with light. Ships of every shape and size moved around it like fish in a coral reef. This was supposed to be a place of unity, a place where different species worked together. Instead, it was a place where the strong dominated the weak and everyone pretended that was justice. The horizon's edge jumped into faster-than-light travel, and the station disappeared from view. Jake sat in his command chair and read through the Operation Ghost Protocol file again. The more he read, the more he understood. Humanity had been preparing for this moment since the day they joined the coalition. They hoped they would never need these preparations. They built them anyway because humans understood something that the elder races had forgotten: hope for peace but prepare for war. The shuttle descended through Earth's atmosphere, and Jake watched his home planet grow larger in the window. Blue oceans, white clouds, and green continents spread below him. He had not been back to Earth in 3 years. The planet looked the same as always, beautiful and peaceful. But he knew that appearances could lie. The shuttle landed at the Earth Defense Force headquarters in Geneva. The building was built into the side of a mountain, hidden from casual observation. When Jake and Lisa stepped out onto the landing pad, armed guards met them. These were not regular soldiers. They moved with precision and confidence that came from serious training. One of them escorted Jake and Lisa inside. The interior of the facility surprised Jake. He expected offices and meeting rooms. Instead, he saw massive corridors filled with activity. People hurried past carrying data tablets and equipment. Holographic displays showed star maps and tactical information. Everything had the feel of a military command center preparing for battle. Admiral Kevin Price met them in his office. He was an older man with white hair and a face marked by years of responsibility. He shook hands with both of them and told them to sit. The Admiral did not waste time with small talk. He activated a holographic display that showed the secret fleet Jake had seen orbiting Earth. The Admiral explained that what Jake saw was only part of the truth. Earth had been building ships in secret for over 80 years. Not just a few experimental vessels, but an entire fleet designed for one purpose: to fight and win against any enemy that threatened humanity. These ships were hidden in asteroid facilities and construction yards in the outer solar system, where coalition sensors never looked. Jake asked why. Why build such a massive military force while pretending to be a minor species with only defensive capabilities? The Admiral's answer was simple: because humans learned from history. Every time in Earth's past when people became complacent, when they trusted that others would protect them, disaster followed. Humanity would never make that mistake again. Lisa asked about the technology. She said the ships she saw did not look like anything in the Coalition database. The Admiral smiled. He said that was because humans never stopped innovating. The Coalition species relied on technology that was hundreds of years old. They made small improvements over time but never pushed for revolutionary advances. Humans were different. Human scientists and engineers never stopped asking what if. The Admiral took them to a different section of the facility. They entered a secure laboratory where a woman in a white coat was working at a computer terminal. The Admiral introduced her as Dr. Sophie Grant, head of the Strategic Response Division. She looked up from her work and studied Jake and Lisa with sharp eyes. Dr. Grant began explaining the philosophy behind Earth's hidden military. She said that humans made a choice when they joined the Coalition. They chose to be peaceful, to focus on trade and exploration instead of conquest. But that choice was not the same as weakness. Humans could be peaceful because they chose to be, not because they had to be. She showed them historical records from Earth. Wars that lasted for years or decades. Conflicts that killed millions. Technologies developed for the sole purpose of destroying enemies. Humanity had thousands of years of experience with organized violence. When they joined the Coalition, they did not forget those lessons. They just decided not to use them unless necessary. Jake said that the Coalition would never have accepted humanity as members if they knew about the secret fleet. Dr. Grant nodded. She said that was exactly why it was kept secret. Humans wanted to join the galactic community. They wanted peace and cooperation. But they also wanted insurance. The fleet was that insurance. The Admiral led them to another part of the facility. They entered a massive hangar where a ship sat in the center. It was bigger than any vessel Jake had ever seen. Dark metal, sharp angles, and weapons ports covering almost every surface. The Admiral said this was the Nemesis, the flagship of Earth's secret fleet. It was a dreadnought-class warship with enough firepower to destroy a small moon. A woman approached them from across the hangar floor. Jake recognized her immediately. Captain Elena Rodriguez, the one who had sent him the message about Operation Ghost Protocol. She looked different than he remembered. More serious, more focused. She greeted the Admiral with a salute and then turned to Jake and Lisa. Elena explained that she commanded the Nemesis. She had been training for this role for 10 years. The ship's crew numbered over 800 people, all volunteers who understood what they were preparing for. Every single person on board had been through combat simulations that were designed to be harder than any real battle. They were ready. Jake asked to see more of the technology. Dr. Grant took them to a research laboratory where engineers were testing weapon systems. She showed them something called a nanoforge weapon. It fired projectiles that could disassemble matter at the molecular level. Shields that protected Coalition ships would be useless against it. The weapon would pass through the shield and tear apart the hull beneath. Then she showed them the quantum displacement drive. This technology allowed ships to jump short distances instantaneously, not faster than light travel, but actual teleportation across space. A ship could be in one location, and then suddenly appear somewhere else with no time passing in between. In a battle, this would be devastating. Enemy ships would not be able to track or predict movements. The next demonstration was even more impressive. Dr. Grant showed them the Artificial Intelligence Tactical Network. Human ships could link their computers together to create a single coordinated intelligence. This AI could analyze enemy formations, predict their movements, and coordinate attacks with precision no biological crew could match. It was like having a chess master controlling the entire fleet. Chief Engineer Ryan Collins joined them for the next part of the tour. He was a broad-shouldered man with grease stains on his uniform. He explained the electronic warfare systems that human ships carried. These systems could hack into enemy vessels and take control of their functions. They could disable weapons, shut down engines, or even make enemy ships fire on each other. Lisa asked how long it would take to get the fleet ready for combat. The Admiral said they were already ready. Every ship had been fully armed and supplied for months. Crews had been on standby since the first merchant ship was attacked. All they needed was the order to deploy. That order could come at any moment. Jake felt overwhelmed by everything he was seeing. The scale of the preparation was enormous. Humanity had spent decades and countless resources building a military force that could challenge the most powerful species in the galaxy, and they did it all in secret while maintaining the appearance of being weak and peaceful. The Admiral took them to a conference room where other officers were waiting. Captain Nina Shaw commanded a ship called the Phantom. Captain Luke Harper commanded the Retribution. Captain Owen Wright commanded the Sovereign. Each of them looked competent and serious. These were not people playing at being soldiers. These were warriors who had trained for years. The meeting began with a review of the current situation. The Krathon had given humanity 30 days to evacuate the colonies. 20 days remained. Intelligence reports suggested the Krathon were assembling a fleet near their home system. They expected an easy victory against what they believed was a weak opponent. Captain Shaw asked about rules of engagement. Would they try to minimize casualties or fight to win at any cost? The Admiral's answer was clear. Humanity tried peace and diplomacy. The Coalition refused to help. The Krathon chose violence. Now humanity would respond with overwhelming force. The goal was not just to win, but to win so decisively that nobody would threaten human colonies again. Elena asked about the colonists. Would they be evacuated before the fighting started? The Admiral said yes. Every colony was already preparing evacuation plans. Families would be moved to safe locations before any battles began. Humanity would not risk civilian lives. The war would be fought by soldiers who chose to fight. Jake finally spoke up. He asked if anyone had considered what this would mean for humanity's relationship with the Coalition. If humans revealed their true military capability and destroyed a Krathon fleet, the entire galactic order would change. The elder races would never trust humanity again. The smaller species would fear them. Dr. Grant answered his question. She said that the relationship with the Coalition was already broken. The elder races revealed their true nature when they abandoned humanity. The smaller species showed they cared more about their own safety than about justice. Whatever relationship existed before was built on false assumptions. Better to reveal the truth now than continue living a lie. Lisa added that perhaps the Coalition needed this lesson. For too long, the elder races had dominated through intimidation. Smaller species lived in fear and accepted injustice because they had no other choice. If humanity could stand up to the Krathon and win, it might inspire others. The galaxy might become a more just place. The Admiral ended the meeting by saying that the decision had been made at the highest levels of Earth's government. The colonies would not be abandoned. The Krathon threats would not be accepted. If war came, the 30 days passed quickly. War Marshal Draxus assembled his fleet in Krathon space. 200 warships, each one massive and heavily armed. The Krathon military had been the dominant force in the galaxy for centuries. Their ships were designed for intimidation as much as combat. They looked like floating fortresses covered in weapons. Draxus stood on the bridge of his flagship and looked at the fleet assembled around him. He felt satisfied. Intelligence reports said humanity had perhaps 40 defensive vessels. The Krathon outnumbered them 5-1. This would not be a battle. It would be an execution. After this, no species would dare question Krathon authority again. The fleet jumped into faster-than-light travel and headed toward human space. Their target was New Horizon, the largest human colony outside the Sol system. Over 2 million people lived there. Draxus planned to make an example of this world. He would bombard the planet until the humans surrendered completely. Meanwhile, Jake stood in the tactical center of the Nemesis. The human fleet was already in position. They had evacuated all the colonies 2 weeks earlier. Millions of people were moved to safe locations in the Sol system. The Krathon would find empty worlds. This disappointed some of the colonists who wanted to stay and fight. But the military commanders were clear. This war would be fought by soldiers, not civilians. Captain Elena Rodriguez stood next to the command chair. Her crew worked quietly at their stations. Everyone knew what was coming. They had practiced for this moment hundreds of times in simulations. But simulations were different from real combat. Real combat meant people would die. The sensor officer reported that the Krathon fleet had entered human space. They were approaching New Horizon exactly as predicted. Admiral Price's voice came through the communication system from Earth. He gave the order. All ships were authorized to engage. Rules of engagement were clear. Disable or destroy enemy vessels. Show no mercy to those who showed none to human merchant ships. The human fleet activated their quantum displacement drives. One moment they were scattered across human space. The next moment they appeared in formation near New Horizon. But they did not appear where the Krathon expected. They appeared inside the Krathon formation, distributed among the enemy ships. Draxus stared at his sensors in confusion. The readings made no sense. Ships had appeared from nowhere. Not just a few ships, but dozens of them. They materialized inside his defensive formation. His science officer reported that the readings were accurate. Somehow the human ships had teleported. Before Draxus could give orders, his communication officer reported an incoming message on all frequencies. Elena's voice was calm and clear. She identified herself as the commander of the Earth Defense Force fleet. She said this was the only warning the Krathon would receive. Stand down immediately or be destroyed. There would be no negotiations. Draxus laughed. He saw 30 human ships surrounded by 200 Krathon warships. The humans were outnumbered and outgunned. This was some kind of trick or bluff. He ordered his fleet to open fire. Kill them all, he said. Show these primitives what happens when they challenge the Krathon Empire. The Krathon fleet fired their weapons. Thousands of energy beams and missiles filled the space around the human ships. But the human vessels were no longer there. They had jumped again, appearing in different locations. The Krathon weapons hit empty space or struck other Krathon ships that were in the line of fire. Then the human ships fired back. The nanoforge weapons looked like streams of silver light. When they hit Krathon shields, they passed right through. The shields were designed to stop energy weapons and solid projectiles. They could not stop something that disassembled matter at the molecular level. The silver streams touched Krathon hulls and the metal simply dissolved. Draxus watched in horror as 5 of his ships exploded within seconds. The human weapons cut through armor like it was paper. His tactical officer reported that shields were ineffective. The weapons were using some kind of technology the Krathon had never encountered. Jake watched the battle from the tactical display. The artificial intelligence network was coordinating the entire fleet. Every human ship knew where every other ship was at all times. They moved like a single organism, appearing and vanishing, striking and retreating. The Krathon fleet was in chaos. They could not track their targets. They could not coordinate their defenses. Captain Nina Shaw commanded the Phantom. Her ship specialized in hit-and-run tactics. She jumped behind a group of Krathon vessels, fired her weapons at their engine sections, and jumped away before they could respond. 17 enemy ships lost power and began drifting. They were still alive but completely helpless. Captain Luke Harper commanded the Retribution. His ship carried electronic warfare systems. He targeted a squadron of Krathon vessels and activated his hacking protocols. The Krathon computers were not designed to resist this kind of attack. Within seconds, Harper's systems had seized control of their weapons. The Krathon ships began firing on each other. The battle lasted 17 minutes. Jake had expected it to take longer, but the human advantages were too great. The quantum displacement drives meant Krathon weapons could not hit their targets. The nanoforge weapons meant Krathon shields were useless. The electronic warfare systems meant Krathon ships could not trust their own computers. And the AI tactical network meant human ships coordinated their attacks perfectly. Draxus stood on his bridge surrounded by smoke and sparks. Half his fleet was destroyed or disabled. The other half was in complete disorder. Ships were firing randomly or not firing at all. Some were trying to escape. Others had stopped moving entirely. His communication officer was dead. His weapons officer was injured. The battle was lost and Draxus knew it. He watched as 27 Krathon ships managed to break away from the battle. They jumped into faster-than-light travel and fled toward Krathon space. Elena did not pursue them. She let them go. They would carry the message back to the Krathon Empire. They would tell the story of how the humans fought. Elena's voice came through on all frequencies again. She addressed the surviving Krathon vessels. She said humanity offered peace. The Krathon chose conflict. Now they would understand what that meant. The merchant ships that were destroyed carried families. Children lost parents. People lost friends. Those deaths would not be forgotten or forgiven. She continued speaking. She said this battle was just the beginning. If the Krathon Empire wanted to continue the war, humanity would bring the fight to their homeworlds. The human fleet could reach Krathon space in weeks. When they arrived, they would not stop until the Krathon leadership surrendered unconditionally. The choice was theirs. Thraxus's flagship lost power completely. Life support was failing. His crew scrambled to put on emergency suits. Through his viewport, he watched human ships moving among the wreckage of his fleet. They were methodical and efficient. This was not how battles were supposed to go. The Krathon were the strongest military power in the galaxy. They did not lose battles like this, but they had lost, completely and decisively. 173 Krathon vessels were destroyed. Most of the crews were dead. Another 108 vessels were disabled and would be captured. Only 27 escaped. The humans had not lost a single ship. Not one. It was not a battle. It was a demonstration of absolute technological superiority. The Coalition had been monitoring the battle from their sensor stations. Ambassador Lisa Hamilton stood in the Coalition Assembly Hall and watched the reactions. The Vex Collective representatives were silent. The Orlan Sovereignty representatives looked shocked. The smaller species watched with amazement. A minor species had just defeated an elder race. The impossible had happened. One of the Orlan representatives approached Lisa. He asked how this was possible. How did humans develop such advanced technology? Where did they build these ships? Why did nobody know about this? Lisa's answer was simple. Nobody asked. Everyone assumed humans were weak because they acted peaceful. Nobody considered that peace was a choice, not a necessity. The Coalition chair called for an emergency session. The elder races demanded explanations. They wanted to know if humanity planned to attack other species. They wanted to know what humans intended to do with their military power. The smaller species wanted to know if humanity would protect them if they faced similar threats. Lisa stood on the central platform again. This time the assembly hall was completely silent. Everyone waited to hear what she would say. She began by reminding them of recent events. Human merchant ships were destroyed. 300 people died. Humanity asked the Coalition for help. The Coalition refused. The elder races abandoned humanity when help was needed. She said that humanity learned an important lesson. Justice in the Coalition depended on power. The strong did what they wanted. The weak suffered what they must. This was not the galactic community that humanity hoped to join. This was just another version of the jungle where predators ruled through fear. Lisa continued. She said humans would not become predators. They would not use their military power to dominate others, but they would never again trust the Coalition to protect them. And they would never again accept threats from any species, elder race or not. Humanity had tried to be good galactic citizens. That effort was rejected. Now the news of the defeat reached the Krathon homeworld within hours. The 27 ships that escaped brought back reports that seemed impossible. An entire fleet destroyed in 17 minutes. Weapons that passed through shields. Ships that could teleport. An enemy that fought with precision no biological crew should possess. The military council did not want to believe it. War Emperor Thraxus sat on his throne in the Great Hall of the Imperial Palace. He was the supreme leader of the Krathon Empire. His authority was absolute. His word was law. For 40 years he had ruled without challenge. The Krathon military had never lost a major battle during his reign. Until now. The surviving officers stood before him and delivered their reports. They described the battle in detail. How human ships appeared from nowhere. How their weapons destroyed everything they touched. How Krathon vessels fired on each other because their computers were controlled by the enemy. Thraxus listened to every word. His face showed no emotion, but his claws dug into the armrests of his throne. When the reports were finished, Thraxus's military advisors spoke. They said the defeat was a fluke. The humans used surprise and trickery. In a fair fight, the Krathon would prevail. They recommended assembling an even larger fleet. 800 warships. They would crush the humans through sheer numbers. No amount of technology could overcome such overwhelming force. Thraxus agreed. He refused to accept that the Krathon Empire could be defeated by a species that had been part of the Coalition for barely a century. This was about more than just the human colonies. This was about Krathon pride and dominance. If humanity was allowed to defy the Empire and win, other species would follow. The entire galactic order would collapse. Orders went out across Krathon space. Every available warship was to report to the assembly point. Reserves were activated. Older vessels were pulled out of storage and made ready for battle. The Krathon had not mobilized their full military strength in over 200 years. Now they would show the galaxy why they were feared. Meanwhile, the coalition watched these preparations with growing concern. The Vex Collective called an emergency meeting. Their representatives argued that the conflict between humans and Krathon threatened galactic stability. They proposed that the coalition demand both sides agree to a ceasefire. The Orlan sovereignty supported this proposal. Ambassador Lisa Hamilton received the coalition's formal request. She was asked to attend a special session where the ceasefire proposal would be discussed. Lisa agreed to attend, but she already knew what her answer would be. Humanity had tried asking the coalition for help before. The result was abandonment. Now the coalition wanted to interfere when humans were winning. The special session began with representatives from multiple species urging humanity to accept a ceasefire. They argued that continued fighting would destabilize the galaxy. They suggested that humanity had made their point. The Krathon knew humans were strong. There was no need for more bloodshed. Peace could be negotiated now. Lisa stood and listened to all of them. When they finished, she delivered her response. She asked them where this concern was when human merchant ships were being destroyed. Where was the coalition when 300 humans died? Where were these calls for peace when the Krathon threatened to bombard human colonies? She said that the coalition's sudden interest in peace was transparent. They were not concerned about justice or stability. They were concerned that the balance of power was shifting. The elder races were afraid. The smaller species were hopeful. Everyone was recalculating their positions based on humanity's demonstration of military strength. Lisa continued. She said humanity would not accept a ceasefire unless the Krathon met specific conditions. They must formally apologize for the merchant ship attacks. They must pay reparations to the families of those killed. They must surrender all territorial claims to human space, and they must accept oversight of their military to prevent future aggression. These terms were not negotiable. The coalition representatives protested. They said the terms were too harsh. The Krathon would never accept such humiliation. Lisa's response was cold. Then the Krathon should prepare for total war. Humanity had the capability to take the fight to Krathon homeworlds. If the Empire wanted to continue, humanity would finish what the Krathon started. Back on Earth, Admiral Price was preparing for exactly that scenario. Intelligence reports showed the Krathon were assembling a massive fleet. 800 warships was more than the humans had faced before. The numbers were concerning but not decisive. Quality mattered more than quantity in modern warfare. Dr. Sophie Grant presented the latest development to the command staff. She called it the Singularity Protocol. This was a network of quantum-linked satellites that would be deployed throughout human space. These satellites would work together to create a battlefield environment that humans could manipulate at will. Chief Engineer Ryan Collins explained how it worked. The satellites could interfere with enemy sensors, making human ships invisible or creating false targets. They could redirect enemy weapons fire by manipulating local spacetime. They could coordinate fleet movements with perfect precision. In effect, the entire battle space would become an extension of human strategy. Jake listened to the presentation with growing understanding. This was not just advanced technology. This was a complete reimagining of how space battles were fought. The Krathon would be blind, confused, and helpless. Their greater numbers would not help them if they could not find or hit their targets. Commander Morrison proposed a risky strategy. He suggested letting the Krathon fleet penetrate deep into human territory. Draw them to Terra Nova, the site of the first battle. Let them think they were advancing toward an easy target. Then activate the Singularity Protocol and trap them in a killing field. Captain Elena Rodriguez argued against this plan. If something went wrong, the Krathon fleet would be in the heart of human space. They could strike at colonies or even attempt an attack on Earth itself. The risk was too high. Better to meet them at the border and destroy them there. Jake countered her objections. He said this was their chance to end the war completely and decisively. If they met the Krathon at the border, some ships would escape. Those ships would return to Krathon space and the Empire would build another fleet. The war would continue for years. But if they destroyed the entire Grand Armada in one battle, the Krathon Empire would have no military capacity left. They would be forced to surrender. Admiral Price considered both arguments. He understood the risks. He also understood the opportunity. After a long silence, he made his decision. They would use Morrison's plan. The Krathon Grand Armada would be lured into human space and destroyed at Terra Nova. The Singularity Protocol would be activated at maximum strength. This battle would be remembered for centuries. The human fleet expanded to 70 vessels. New ships that had been in final construction were rushed into service. More crews volunteered than there were positions available. Everyone wanted to be part of this battle. Everyone understood what was at stake. This was not just about colonies or territory. This was about whether humanity would be respected or dominated. Captain Nina Shaw spent hours with her crew running simulations. The Phantom was designed for speed and surprise. In the coming battle, she would lead strike groups that would target Krathon command vessels. Take out their leadership and the rest of the fleet would fall into chaos. Captain Luke Harper prepared the electronic warfare systems on the Retribution. He knew that once the Singularity Protocol was active, the Krathon computers would be vulnerable to attack. He planned to seize control of entire squadrons and turn them against each other. The Krathon would not just fight humans, they would fight themselves. Captain Owen Wright checked the weapon systems on the Sovereign. His ship carried the most powerful nanoforge weapons in the fleet. He would target the largest Krathon dreadnoughts. Those massive vessels were symbols of Krathon power. When they fell, the psychological impact would be devastating. Jake spent the days before the battle thinking about what was coming. He had read the casualty estimates. Even with all their advantages, humans would likely lose ships. People would die. Friends and colleagues would not survive. War always had a cost. The question was whether the cost was worth paying. He thought about the merchant ship crews who died. He thought about the families in the colonies who were threatened with destruction. He thought about the Coalition's refusal to help. And he thought about what would happen if humanity lost. The Krathon would not be merciful. They would make an example of Earth that would terrify the galaxy for generations. Elena found him in the observation deck of the Nemesis. She could see he was troubled. She asked what was on his mind. Jake said he was thinking about the people they were about to kill. The Krathon soldiers were following orders, just like human soldiers. They probably did not want this war any more than humans did. Elena understood his feelings. She said that empathy was what separated humans from the Krathon leadership. Human commanders cared about the cost of war. They did not want to kill unless necessary, but that empathy could not prevent them from doing what had to be done. The Krathon Empire made a choice to threaten humanity. Now they would... The Krathon Grand Armada arrived at Terra Nova exactly when intelligence predicted. 800 warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel in a massive formation. War Emperor Thraxus stood on the bridge of his flagship and looked at the displays. He saw the planet below. He saw the orbital facilities. And he saw the human fleet waiting for them. Thraxus counted 70 human vessels. His fleet outnumbered them more than 11 to 1. He smiled. The humans were brave or foolish, probably both. They chose to make their stand here in open space, rather than hiding behind planetary defenses. This would be over quickly. The Krathon would crush them through sheer weight of numbers. The human fleet was arranged in a loose formation around Terra Nova. They made no attempt to hide or use the planet for cover. They just waited. Thraxus found this strange. After the first battle, the humans knew what Krathon weapons could do. Why would they position themselves so openly? His tactical officer reported that all Krathon ships were in position. The fleet formed a massive sphere around the human vessels. Thraxus gave the order, advance and destroy. No prisoners, no mercy. The humans would be annihilated as an example to any species that dared challenge the Krathon Empire. The Krathon fleet began moving forward. Then something went wrong. Sensor displays started showing errors. Ships reported that they could not get accurate readings on the human vessels. Navigation systems gave contradictory information. Communication between ships became difficult as signals were disrupted or delayed. Thraxus demanded to know what was happening. His science officer had no explanation. The interference was coming from everywhere and nowhere. It was as if space itself was working against them. Then the officer's eyes widened. He reported detecting thousands of small objects throughout the area. Satellites. The humans had saturated the entire region with some kind of network. On the Nemesis, Jake watched as the Singularity Protocol activated. The quantum-linked satellites began their work. The battlefield was no longer neutral space. It was a trap that the Krathon had walked into willingly. Elena gave the order. All ships engage at will. Let them see what humans can do. The human ships disappeared from Krathon sensors. One moment they were there. The next moment, the displays showed only empty space. Krathon gunners fired at where the human ships had been. Their weapons hit nothing. Then human vessels began appearing in different locations, firing their nanoforge weapons and vanishing again before the Krathon could respond. Thraxus watched in growing horror as his fleet fell apart. Ships were exploding everywhere. His crews reported seeing human vessels appear right next to them, fire and disappear. The Krathon weapons could not track targets that teleported. The shields could not stop weapons that dissolved matter, and the computer systems were under constant attack. Captain Nina Shaw led her strike group against the Krathon command vessels. The Phantom jumped directly behind the flagship of a Krathon admiral. Her weapons officer fired a precise burst that destroyed the ship's bridge. The entire vessel lost coordination. The ships under that admiral's command began firing randomly or stopped moving altogether. She jumped to the next command vessel and repeated the attack. Then the next. Within 10 minutes, Shaw had eliminated 12 Krathon admirals. The enemy fleet had no leadership except Thraxus himself, and his orders were not getting through because the Singularity Protocol was disrupting communications. Captain Luke Harper activated his electronic warfare systems. The Retribution targeted an entire squadron of Krathon vessels. Harper's team broke through their computer defenses in seconds. The Krathon systems were not built to resist this level of sophisticated hacking. Within moments, Harper had control. He made the Krathon ships turn their weapons on each other. 30 vessels began firing at their own squadron mates. The Krathon crews tried to override the commands but failed. They watched helplessly as their own ships destroyed each other. Harper moved to the next squadron and did the same thing. The Krathon were not just fighting humans. They were fighting their own vessels. Captain Owen Wright commanded the Sovereign. His target was the largest Krathon dreadnoughts. These massive vessels were the pride of the Krathon fleet. They were supposed to be indestructible. Wright proved otherwise. His nanoforge weapons cut through their hulls like hot knives through butter. The dreadnoughts exploded in spectacular fashion. Each one that died took dozens of smaller ships with it. Jake monitored the battle from the tactical center. The artificial intelligence network was coordinating everything perfectly. Every human ship knew where every other ship was. They moved like a single organism with 70 different parts. The Krathon fleet was in complete chaos. They could not coordinate. They could not communicate. They could not even trust their own sensors. The battle had been going for 30 minutes when Thraxus realized the truth. They were not fighting a battle. They were being systematically exterminated. His fleet was dying and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The human technology was so far beyond Krathon capabilities that it might as well be magic. He tried to order a retreat, but his communications were jammed. He tried to coordinate a counterattack, but his tactical displays were filled with false information. He tried to rally his forces, but they could not hear him. The Singularity Protocol had turned the entire battlefield into a prison from which there was no escape. Thraxus remembered the reports from the first battle. He had dismissed them as exaggerations or lies. Now he understood. The humans had not been lucky. They had been holding back. Their technology was centuries beyond anything the Coalition possessed. The Krathon Empire had picked a fight with a species that understood warfare better than anyone alive. A human vessel appeared directly in front of his flagship. It was larger than the others. This was the human command ship. Thraxus watched as it hung there in space, weapons trained on his bridge. Then a communication came through on all frequencies. It was the human commander who had warned them before the first battle. Jake Morrison's voice was calm and cold. He spoke directly to Thraxus. He said that humanity joined the Coalition seeking peace. Humans wanted to be part of the galactic community. They wanted to trade, explore, and build friendships with other species. The Krathon destroyed that dream when they murdered innocent people on merchant ships. Jake continued. He said the Krathon made a fatal mistake. They assumed that because humans acted peaceful, they must be weak. They confused kindness with inability. They forgot that peace is a choice that can be revoked. Humanity tried diplomacy. They asked the Coalition for help. When both failed, they chose war. And humans were very good at war. His final words echoed across every Krathon channel. You wanted conflict. We warned you. We told you what would happen. Now watch your empire burn. The transmission ended. The Nemesis fired a single shot that destroyed Thraxus's engines. The flagship went dark. Life support began failing. The War Emperor who came to destroy humanity was now helpless and dying. The battle continued for another hour. The human fleet methodically eliminated every Krathon vessel that continued to fight. Ships that powered down their weapons were disabled and left adrift. Ships that tried to escape were destroyed. By the end, 674 Krathon warships were destroyed. 108 were disabled and would be captured. 18 managed to jump away before the Singularity Protocol could prevent their escape. The human fleet suffered no losses. Not one ship was destroyed. A few had minor damage from Krathon weapons that managed to hit them, but compared to the Krathon casualties, human losses were essentially zero. It was not a battle. It was an execution. Elena stood on the bridge of the Nemesis and looked at the tactical display. The space around Terra Nova was filled with wreckage. Thousands of Krathon sailors were dead. Their ships were destroyed or captured. The Grand Armada that was supposed to crush humanity was gone. The Krathon Empire's military power was broken completely. She felt no joy in the victory. This was not something to celebrate. War was necessary, but never good. All those dead Krathon sailors were just following orders. They probably did not want this war any more than humans did, but they served an empire that chose violence. And violence was met with overwhelming force. Jake ordered the fleet to begin rescue operations. Human ships moved among the wreckage looking for survivors. Escape pods were collected. Injured Krathon were given medical treatment. The laws of war would be followed exactly. Humanity would show mercy to defeated enemies even though the Krathon showed none to merchant ship crews. The Coalition had monitored the entire battle. Every species in the galaxy saw what happened. They watched as a minor species completely destroyed the most powerful military force in known space. The impossible had happened twice now. The elder races were no longer invincible. Ambassador Lisa Hamilton stood in the Coalition Assembly Hall. The room was silent. Nobody knew what to say. The entire galactic order had just changed. A species that joined the Coalition barely a century ago had proven themselves more powerful than civilizations that existed for thousands of years. The Vex Collective representative spoke first. Their emotionless voice asked what humanity intended to do now. Would they attack other SE? 3 weeks after the Battle of Terra Nova, the Coalition held an emergency summit. Representatives from every member species attended. The atmosphere was tense. Everyone understood that the galaxy had changed permanently. The question was how the Coalition would adapt to the new reality. The Krathon sent a delegation. They were not the same proud warriors who had threatened humanity. These Krathon looked defeated and humble. Their empire had lost almost its entire military in 2 battles. Their economy was collapsing. Their people were demanding answers. The government that allowed this disaster was already falling apart. Ambassador Lisa Hamilton presented humanity's terms for peace. The Krathon must formally apologize for attacking merchant ships. They must pay reparations to the families of those who died. They must surrender all territorial claims to human space. They must accept monitoring of their military for the next 50 years to prevent future aggression. And the leaders who ordered the attacks on merchant ships must face trial for war crimes. The Krathon delegation accepted every term without argument. They had no choice. Their military was destroyed. Their economy was broken. If humanity decided to continue the war, the Krathon Empire would cease to exist. Accepting harsh terms was better than extinction, but Lisa surprised everyone with her next statement. She said that humanity would help the Krathon rebuild. Human engineers would assist in repairing damaged infrastructure. Human medical teams would treat Krathon wounded. Human food shipments would help prevent starvation. The war was over. Now was the time for healing. The Coalition representatives were shocked. They expected humans to exploit their victory. Instead, humans were offering aid to their defeated enemy. The Orlan sovereignty representative asked why. Lisa's answer was simple. Because it was the right thing to do. Humanity did not fight for revenge or conquest. They fought for justice and security. Those goals were achieved. Destroying the Krathon people would accomplish nothing. The Vex Collective raised concerns about human military power. They wanted guarantees that humanity would not use their technology against other species. Lisa pointed out the obvious. Humanity had possessed this technology for decades. They never used it for conquest or intimidation. They only revealed it when attacked. That should be guarantee enough, she continued. If the coalition was concerned about powerful militaries, perhaps they should consider why the Krathon were allowed to build such a large fleet in the first place. The elder races maintained massive militaries for centuries. Nobody questioned them. Now humans had proven military capability, and suddenly it was a problem. The double standard was obvious. Several smaller species spoke in support of humanity. They said that for the first time in centuries they felt hope. The elder races were no longer invincible. Smaller species could seek justice without fear. Humanity had proven that strength could be challenged. The galaxy was more equal now than it had been in generations. The summit ended with formal recognition of humanity as a major power in the coalition. Humans would have full voting rights on all matters. Their territory was confirmed and would be protected by coalition law. Any future aggression against humans would be treated as a threat to galactic peace. The elder races accepted these terms because they had no real choice. Jake Morrison watched the proceedings from the observer section. He felt a complex mix of emotions. Pride in what humanity accomplished, sadness for all the lives lost, relief that the war was over, and concern about what would come next. Power brought responsibility. Humanity was now responsible for maintaining the new order they created. After the summit, Jake traveled back to Earth. He had been away from home for months. The planet looked different somehow, or maybe he was different. War changed people. He had seen things he would never forget, done things he was not entirely proud of. But it was necessary. That would have to be enough. Admiral Kevin Price met with Jake in Geneva. The admiral looked tired but satisfied. He said that the secret fleet would remain active. The galaxy knew about it now anyway, but the focus would shift from combat to patrol and protection. Human ships would monitor trade routes and prevent piracy. They would respond to distress calls from any species. Power would be used to maintain peace, not threaten it. Dr. Sophie Grant joined them for the meeting. She reported that several coalition species had asked to purchase human technology. She recommended against it. The technology gap was what prevented future conflicts. If every species had quantum displacement drives and nanoforge weapons, the galaxy would tear itself apart. Better to maintain the advantage and use it responsibly. Jake asked about the Singularity Protocol satellites. Would they remain active? The admiral said yes. The network would stay in place throughout human space. It was defensive technology that ensured no enemy fleet could threaten human worlds. The satellites were weapons but also shields. They guaranteed that humanity would never face the kind of threat the Krathon posed. Captain Elena Rodriguez was promoted to Rear Admiral and given command of the patrol fleet. She would oversee operations throughout human space and beyond. Her first assignment was to coordinate with Krathon officials on reconstruction efforts. The irony was not lost on anyone. The officer who helped destroy the Krathon fleet would now help rebuild their civilization. Elena met with Jake before taking her new position. They talked about the war and what it meant. She said that humans proved something important. That peace was not weakness. That kindness was a choice, not a necessity. That the galaxy could be a better place if good people were willing to fight for it. The battles were brutal, but they prevented something worse. The Krathon would have destroyed the colonies and killed millions. That was prevented. Jake asked if she thought the violence was worth it. Elena considered the question carefully. She said that violence was never good, but sometimes it was necessary. Humanity exhausted every peaceful option. They asked for help and were abandoned. They tried diplomacy and were threatened. At some point, peaceful people have to defend themselves. That is not wrong. That is survival. The colonies were repopulated over the following months. Families returned to their homes. Children went back to school. Farmers tended their fields. Merchants resumed trading. Life continued as if the war had never happened. But everyone knew things were different. They had been evacuated to safety while others fought for them. That created a debt that could never be fully repaid. Memorial services were held across human space. 317 names were added to monuments. These were the merchant sailors who died in the original attacks. The war was fought for them. Their deaths were not forgotten. Justice was achieved in their memory. The services were somber but also hopeful. The dead were honored, and the living were safe. Jake accepted a position as a senior advisor to the Earth Defense Force. He would help train the next generation of officers. His experience in both diplomacy and combat made him valuable. He spent his time teaching young people about the responsibilities that came with power. How to use force only when necessary. how to show mercy to defeated enemies, how to maintain peace through strength. One day he received a message from a Krathon official. It was an invitation to visit the Krathon homeworld. The new government wanted to thank him personally for advocating mercy after the war. Jake was surprised but accepted. He traveled to Krathon space with a small delegation. The Krathon homeworld was beautiful in its own way. Red deserts and purple mountains under an orange sky. The cities were ancient and showed signs of recent damage from riots and protests. The old government had fallen. The new leaders were trying to build something better. They understood that the Empire's arrogance had nearly destroyed their species. Jake met with the Krathon president in the capital city. The president was younger than previous leaders. She spoke honestly about her people's mistakes. They had believed themselves superior because they were strong. They forgot that strength could be challenged. They attacked humans expecting an easy victory and discovered their assumptions were wrong. She thanked Jake for recommending that humans help with reconstruction. Many Krathon had expected humans to let them starve or collapse. Instead, humans sent aid and assistance. This kindness was teaching the Krathon something they had forgotten, that civilization was not about domination. It was about cooperation and mutual support. Jake told her that humanity did not hate the Krathon people. The war was against an aggressive government, not an entire species. Now that the war was over, there was no reason for continued suffering. Humans and Krathon could build a better relationship based on respect instead of fear. That would benefit everyone. Years passed. The galaxy adjusted to the new order. The Krathon rebuilt their civilization with human help. They developed a democratic government and reduced their military to defensive levels. Trade between humans and Krathon flourished. Old enemies became cautious friends. Other species in the coalition found new confidence. Smaller civilizations were no longer afraid to speak up in the assembly. They knew that if they faced aggression, humanity would support them. The elder races still had influence, but they could no longer dominate through intimidation. The coalition became more democratic and more just.